Hi, this is Shubham Tiwari, and I welcome you to the Salespanel podcast, where we highlight the journeys and open up the playbooks of thought leaders from the B2B world. Tune in for all the things on data-driven marketing, product-led growth, and customer intelligence. Our guest today is a fractional CMO who helps fast-growing B2B SaaS companies attract and engage better prospects. His expertise includes strategic positioning, strategic plans to focus on marketing that makes sense to him and to the market, of course, and overseeing tactical execution and creating systems, among many other things. He's the founder of Marketing Spark. Mark Evans, welcome to Salespanel.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. It's always great to talk about B2B SaaS marketing.
We are so grateful to have you. So, Mark, let's begin with Marketing Spark and the role you play in it. Please tell us more about it.
So the company started in 2008. Before then, I had co-founded a startup and worked for several startups. And unfortunately, there was a credit crisis in 2008, and I was let go by a startup and couldn't figure out what to do next. And I just fell into marketing consulting. And over time, I've sort of doubled down on B2B SaaS. It's obviously one of the most exciting growth areas in the world. And it's been a great opportunity to work with some great entrepreneurs and really leverage some of my skills and help companies grow.
Right. So, Mark, you work with clients to build their marketing engines that generate consistent leads for their businesses as a consultant. What does creating such engine, entails? Also, can you tell us how you implement these systems as a, fractional CMO, like an outsider in, you're coming in, right? Yeah.
Right. So a lot of my clients are early stage B2B SaaS companies. They're doing no or little marketing. So they're mostly product led or sales led. And they're driven by an entrepreneur or a founder who's got a vision and a passion and enthusiasm. And they develop a product and they gain some momentum that way. But at some point in time, they recognize that marketing is a way to amplify their story, is to help them take their growth to the next level. The problem is they don't know what to do and they don't know how to do it. And they use me as a strategic guide, someone who will help them step in and help them figure out what matters to them based on their target audiences, their resources, and what's going to move the needle. Because you can do a lot of marketing and there's a lot of good marketing you can do, but if it doesn't make a difference, then for an early stage company, that's a recipe for disaster because you're busy, but you're not busy doing the right things. So what I do is I try to establish a marketing foundation upon which they can build. At some point in time, they're going to need their own marketers and they're going to need marketers with specific skills. But at the beginning, they need that foundation and that engine. And so where I start with all my clients is after doing sort of the deep discovery is positioning.
Right.
Because if you haven't got your positioning down, then your marketing and sales are going to be ineffective. You're telling the wrong story to the wrong audiences. So positioning really comes down to four things. What do you do? Who do you serve? Why what you do matters? What are the benefits? What's the value? What difference are you going to make? And how are you unique? From the outside looking in, it seems fairly simplistic, but it's hard to boil down the ocean. It's hard to really get the essence of your message down into those simple terms, but you have to do that. Once you've got your positioning down, then you can start to develop messaging on your website, in your sales and marketing collateral, on social media, and all the other places where you want to tell your story. And then the next step, which happens in parallel, is putting together a go-to-market plan focused on doing the right things at the right time, focus on the right people. And that is, it's basically marketing 101. It doesn't sound terribly sexy, in terms of doing retargeting and ABM and all those other things. But unless you've got a solid foundation, like it's like building a house, unless you've got a solid foundation, the house could fall apart. And that's the value that I provide to a lot of B2B SaaS companies.
Right. So I was coming to, positioning, but you sort of addressed, my question, you sort of preempted it. So let me, just rephrase it. When you see a lot of early stage B2B SaaS companies, and you have your parameters to, check where they stand in positioning. So what mistakes do they, generally make? What is, something that you notice in almost every case?
Mistake number one is a lot of B2B SaaS companies don't focus on their positioning. They ignore it. often at their own peril, because many companies are products focused.
Yeah.
You can understand that they have an idea, they hire a bunch of software developers, they add feature after feature after feature, and that's what matters to them. Because if you're an entrepreneur, and especially if you're an engineer, product is king, technology is king. So they'll do some marketing, some content marketing, some social media marketing, go to conferences, but they never get around to focusing on their positioning. And that's a mistake. So that's mistake number one. So what happens is they have positioning, they have a great product, but they have positioning that is confusing, incoherent, inconsistent. And when you're dealing in ultra competitive marketplaces, unless you can grab someone's attention, unless they can immediately understand what you do and why it matters to them, they'll move on. Your competitor is a click away. So unless you can make them stop for a second, then basically you're operating with one hand tied behind your back. So that's the number one thing about positioning. The second thing is that they develop positioning within a silo. So they do their own positioning. So they're making an educated guess on what they think will resonate with target audiences, as opposed to doing the research, talking to customers, which we can talk about, and finding out what matters to customers. And because in many ways, really good positioning reflects what your customers want and what they're telling you.
Right.
And a lot of companies essentially they have a hypothesis and they put it out into the marketplace, but they don't test it. And so when it doesn't resonate, when you don't get conversions and sales, they're puzzled. But the fact of the matter is they haven't done their research. They haven't done their homework. So that's mistake number two, is positioning. And the third mistake is that positioning is very fluid and dynamic. It's not one of these things where you etch it in stone and that's it. You never touch it again, because the market changes. Like right now, for example, the economic landscape is shifting. So with growth slowing down, a year ago, 18 months ago, it was all about growth. Everything had to be about growth and how to scale, how to drive more leads, how to drive more sales. Now, the focus may be on cost efficiencies and productivity. And perhaps instead of attracting new prospects, it has to be about reducing churn and how to sell more to your existing customers. So positioning and messaging are always evolving. And as a company, you have to check in. Maybe it's once a quarter, maybe it's once every 6 months, but unless you're updating your positioning and messaging on a regular basis, then it can go stale pretty quickly. So those are the three biggest mistakes I would say that B2B SaaS companies make when it comes to positioning.
Wonderful. You say you're an expert in creating strategic plans to focus on marketing that makes sense. What do you mean by that?
Well, let me say first that I may call myself an expert, but there's lots of smart people out there. So I try to do my best to help companies focus on the right things at the right time. And when I say marketing that makes sense, I think a lot of companies have to be pragmatic about what they want to do versus what they can do. And at the same time, doing things as well as possible. So, when a lot of companies, when they do marketing, they have a shotgun approach to marketing. They try to do a lot of different things because they feel that that's the best way that they can resonate with a broad audience. And what happens is that they end up doing everything kind of okay, but nothing really amazing. And so I'm a big believer when it comes to companies that are just starting to grow, is that less is more. Is that if you focus on fewer things, but you do them really, really well, then you'll get better results. And as you gain more resources or raise more money or attract more sales, then you can start to do more and more and more. The biggest, I think, mistake that a lot of companies make is that it's almost like they run before they walk. Is that they're so excited about growth and the possibilities and the opportunities. And there's a sense of anxiety that if we don't do all these things, then we won't grow. And as a result, they lack patience. They make mistakes because they move too quickly. And sometimes they don't give what they're doing enough time to make a difference.
Yeah.
So I guess it's a long-winded answer to the fact that I want to make sure that companies do marketing that's aligned with what their goals are and what their resources are right now, so that they're being as efficient and successful with their marketing as possible. Because if you try to do too much with not enough people or money, then you won't be successful.
Right. So speaking about, the money and everything, we are going through sort of a downturn. So during a downturn, what tactical mistakes one should avoid while implementing their marketing strategy? Let's take the ongoing downturn as a reference. And since you also mentioned the 2008 downturn as well, so you come from there. So what is your advice to the people? Yeah.
The biggest mistake that companies are going to make when economic conditions get a little volatile is they cut back on marketing and they eliminate marketing staff, because marketing is such an easy target for cost cutting. Sales is considered like product is like we have to do product, right? Sales, we have to sell, but marketing is, well, for a lot of companies, it's a nice to have versus a need to have.
Yeah.
And so they look at their sales team or they'll look at their marketing team or their marketing budget and they go, yeah, we can cut back on that, or we can eliminate it because we need to focus on what matters. They forget the fact that, companies, it's a three-legged stool, right? You have sales, you have product, and you have marketing. And if you cut one off, then the stool falls down, right? So the biggest mistake is they don't do marketing. Meanwhile, the smart companies, the companies that recognize that when there's uncertainty in the marketplace, there's also opportunity. The smart companies continue to do marketing or do marketing in different ways, or they double down on their marketing. And so while you stand on the sidelines and don't tell your story and you're not being active, your competitors are out there outflanking you, talking to customers, attracting prospects. And at the end of the day, they're going to win.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of companies need to think about that. Now is not the time to basically step away. Now is the time to maybe rethink their approach. So there may be parts of their marketing that don't make sense, that they do have to cut back on, but there are other parts of marketing that may become more important. So for example, you could say, maybe now's the time not to go to conferences, or maybe we should cut back on our advertising. Like that may make sense depending on where you're at. But the other thing is maybe we should spend more money or more time on social media marketing, or producing more content, or repurposing and distributing our content. So the marketing mix may change, but the big mistake is you cut back on your marketing overall, or you decide not to do marketing at all. And that's a recipe for disaster.
Yep. Speaking about your role as a fractional CMO, how do you set up a team initially? Also, how do you develop, marketing function that can scale later? Because as a fractional CMO, you have to leave a legacy, right? Legacy behind a system. So how do you do that?
It's an interesting question, because a lot of the companies that I work with aren't doing marketing at all. They have no marketing people, or they may have a junior marketer who's writing a little content, doing some social media. It's minimal marketing as opposed to marketing with a purpose, marketing with a plan. So as a fractional CMO, I get hired because they realize that there's a gap and they don't know what they don't know. And they just need someone to help them, lead them forward, someone they can trust, someone who can say to them, this is what I think you should do based on working with all these other companies. And this is what you shouldn't do. As a fractional CMO, as a marketing consultant, our job is to push back on clients, because and this is a good piece of advice to listeners, is that when you hire a consultant, you don't want to hire someone who's going to say yes or agree to everything that you want to do or everything that you believe. You need someone who's you're paying someone for their experience and their expertise, and they're going to come to the market and they're going to say to you, you know what, I disagree with you completely. This is the wrong approach. You should not do this because based on what I've seen and what I've done, it's not going to work. And a good CEO, a good entrepreneur will recognize that they have knowledge gaps, and that a marketing consultant can fill those gaps and can help them make better decisions. So that's just advice that I think everyone should follow. So when it comes to actually building out coming in how to help them. So one is really getting the lay of the land. from the outside, when you come from the outside into a company, you'll never know as much as the entrepreneur, the CEO, or about what's going on with the companies. You have to learn the business, you have to learn the product, you have to learn the customers. And then essentially for me, it's after you establish positioning and messaging, then the key thing is you put together a marketing plan. At that time, and only then, can you figure out what kind of resources you need to execute.
Right.
Because until you have a sense of what you want to accomplish, the channels that you want to use, and who you want to focus on, you're operating blind. You just don't have the intelligence to make the right decisions. But once you have all those ingredients, then you can say, okay, to execute on content marketing, for example, we're going to need to hire contractors or freelancers or a full-time employee. You have to make the decision on what you can afford, what makes the most sense from a financial situation. And a lot of the clients that I work on, when they have no marketing, they'll use freelancers and contractors as much as possible out of the gate. It gives them flexibility. They can experiment with different suppliers to figure out who's going to do the best job. They can try something, and if it's not working, move on to something else. When you hire a full-time marketer, you're kind of stuck. And so it's more like you build out a network of freelancers and contractors. You figure once you get some momentum and you figure out what matters to you and what's really working for you, then you hire a full-time resource. And then you can, and over time, you'll get a better sense of what your team looks like. It sounds kind of strange, but my approach to a successful engagement is actually at some point in time to work myself out of a job.
Yeah, that's exactly how I phrased this question. Yeah.
I'm not a permanent resource. I don't want to be the VP marketing for a B2B SaaS company. Oh, I've done that job, and it can be, for a lot of people, it can be a great way to make a living. It's not what I want to do.
Yeah.
Over time, what I want to do is, one, help a CEO or entrepreneur gain confidence in the fact that marketing is important. Here's a marketing engine. The marketing engine is starting to work and show results. We're starting to put assets in place to make it happen on a regular basis. At some point in time, you're going to have to hire a full-time marketing leader.
Right.
And a lot of CEOs are reluctant because you're talking about somebody who's expensive.
Yeah.
When it comes to their salary and stock options and perks. And you don't want to make a mistake when you hire a marketing leader. It's a big hire. And so my philosophy is wait till you know exactly what kind of marketing you want to do. Wait till you see the results that you expect. At that point in time, you want to hire someone who's got the specific skills around the type of marketing that you're doing. So you know exactly who you need to hire and what kind of skills they need to have and what kind of experience they need to have. And then you can hire with confidence.
Right.
And that's the journey that I try to take clients on, to go from no marketing, no systems, to having processes and systems in place, to having good tactical assets, to having the right marketing leadership. And if that happens, then that's a successful engagement to me. And both sides can walk away happy.
Wonderful, wonderful. Joseph Campbell would love to call it a hero's journey. So it's wonderful to be, an outsider coming in. So speaking about, your role, you're an authoritative voice in marketing who has close to 10K followers on LinkedIn. You're about to hit that mark, right, Mark?
Pretty close, yeah. It's funny because I don't really look at the number of followers I have. It's kind of like the cherry on top of a sundae.
That's a nice way of putting it. Yeah.
If you're delivering value and insight, it'll come over time. Hopefully, come over time. You asked me when we were discussing this podcast about my approach to LinkedIn.
Yeah.
And for me, it's all about showing up every day, showing up on a consistent basis, and really trying to talk to the people that matter to me. Because I think that on LinkedIn, we're there for a reason.
Yeah.
Some of us are looking for a job. Some of us are looking to hire people, but a lot of us are looking for business, right? We're looking for leads, we're looking for sales. And so you need to focus on the people that matter to you, and you need to produce content or show insight that resonates with them. If you're not doing that, then why are you on LinkedIn? What's the purpose? What kind of ROI are you getting from LinkedIn? So at a high level, that's where That's how I approach LinkedIn.
And speaking about, how do you, assess your progress, or let's say KPIs you keep, let's say, or also you prescribe to your clients to grow on LinkedIn, because growing on LinkedIn, social selling is also becoming a thing nowadays.
Yep.
So, yeah.
So, okay. So my approach to LinkedIn is there's content, there's comments, and there's conversation, connections, and there's conversations, right? So let's break that down, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So when it comes to content, the key is consistently creating content, high value content that talks to the people that matter to you. So that could be once a week, which is not ideal, or it could be 3 times a week, or it could be 5 times a week. For me, I do it 5 times a week.
Right.
And a LinkedIn post can be 200-300 words. It's not a long essay. It's quick thoughts, quick insights, quick opinion.
Yeah.
But the key for LinkedIn is you have to show up every day, or on a consistent basis, because it's like there's so much content going round and round that people may miss you. Like, it's like a parade, right? They may miss you when you come by, but if the parade comes around again. So consistency is really important. And it's really about writing content that you think is going to serve the audience and that you think is going to be interesting. LinkedIn is very busy right now from a content perspective.
Yeah.
I'm finding a lot of content is very me focused. There's a lot of selfies, a lot of people writing about themselves and their adventures. I think that's the wrong approach. I really think it is about who you have to talk. You have to write content that appeals to the people that you want to do business with. So that's number one, and do it consistently. So whether it's 2 times a week, 3 times a week, or 5 times a week, you got to stick to it. That's the key, because LinkedIn, the algorithm loves consistency. They love it when you show up. And the more you show up and the more you get, the more engagement you get, the better you're going to do. It's basically a reward system. You get rewarded for showing up. The second part of that is obviously comments, right? LinkedIn loves comments, because LinkedIn essentially says the more engagement you get, the more time you spend on the platform, the more they're going to reward you. And so I would comment on 3 to 5 to 10 posts a day. It doesn't have to be long comments, but not short. Like, you can't say, I agree with this idea. That's not a comment, right? That's as good as a like, right? Yeah. But it's providing really good comments on the posts that relate to the target audiences that you're interested in. So you don't have to, like, I wouldn't comment randomly, but I would comment on people who are writing about the things that you're focused on as well. 2 things happen with comments. One is that the author reads your comments, because we all read comments. Other people who comment on that post will read the comment, and your profile will be raised. And the other thing with comments is that when I'm writing comments on somebody else's post, all of a sudden I say to myself, this is a great post, or a great idea for a post. And then I'll add it to my ideas list. And so comments really inspire you to write content. And a lot of people struggle with content because, how do I come up with all these ideas? How do I write consistently? Well, commenting is a great way to spark ideas. And you can build a long list of content really quickly. There, as I mentioned, connections, which it's funny because connections are very much a vanity metric. Everybody has hundreds, if not thousands, of connections. Yeah. And it's easy to reach out to somebody and say, I'd like to connect with you. And if you're someone legit, like if you got a legit job and you try to connect with someone, most people will say yes. Like, the default for LinkedIn connections is sure, yeah, whatever. It's not, you don't get penalized for accepting someone's connection request.
Right.
But I always leave a note, right? I always say, hey, I love that post that you did on this. It would be great to connect, or just make it personal. Like, it doesn't have to be long, but make it personal. And just build out your connections. And the more connections you have, the more people see your content. And the final piece, and this is the gold, right? This is when the magic happens, is when you leverage your connections to have conversations. So you make the leap from a connection, which is really nothing when you think about it, to actually connecting with someone. And what you'll do is, hey, I really enjoy your posts. You're really adding some great value. Would you be interested in jumping on a call to compare notes? I'm not trying to sell. I'm just trying to have a conversation with someone, trying to create a relationship. I would say that, 95+% people who I reach out to will agree to a conversation. 15, 20-minute conversation. A lot of people are still working from home. We've still got flexibility in terms of who we can talk to.
Yeah.
So, and conversations, as they say, you're not trying to sell somebody, but you're just trying to essentially establish a connection and relationship, and you never know what happens. Like conversations lead to possibilities and opportunities.
Absolutely.
Doors open because someone suddenly gets a feel for who you are, what you do, and how you could be relevant to them or other people. So if you combine the 4 C's of LinkedIn, to me, that's the recipe for success, and they all matter, right? They're all different levers that you can pull to be successful on LinkedIn. You just can't write content and not do anything else. You just can't write comments and not do anything else. You have to do a combination. It's a marketing mix for LinkedIn.
Yeah.
And over time, you'll start to build up your momentum. You'll start to create more conversations. People will start to recognize you for what you do. And I look at it as a long-term investment. Like you just have to put the time in, and over time, hopefully it generates ROI.
It's wonderful, Mark. You're one of those, very active people on LinkedIn who are sort of always available for, having a quick, let's say, taking notes from each other, just like you mentioned. So I really, really appreciate that. Speaking about your podcast, you run Marketing Spark. How does it fit into your social media marketing strategy?
Right. Before we move on to that, I forgot to answer the second part of your LinkedIn question in terms of companies being active on LinkedIn.
Yes.
So here's the thing that really amazes me is that a lot of B2B SaaS companies, despite the fact that LinkedIn is the platform for B2B conversations, B2B content, and B2B connections, are very cautious about LinkedIn or very leery about LinkedIn. They're almost afraid to jump on the platform, or they just don't believe that it's the place for them to be. We should go to conferences, we should produce content. And I'm like banging away going, LinkedIn is where it's at. LinkedIn's where it's at. You have to be on LinkedIn. And so, especially I think like every SaaS CEO should have an active LinkedIn profile. They should be creating content.
Right.
They should be making comments. Like they have to leverage their personal brand to build out their own brand and their company's brand on LinkedIn. So I'll leave it there. If you're a SaaS CEO and you're not on LinkedIn, then you're leaving money on the table. Like you have to be there.
Yeah.
So that's my message to LinkedIn.
Absolutely. So and Mark, before you come to the question, just I asked, coming back to the LinkedIn, how important is it to, educate your prospects? Because your prospect might be going through, 10 posts out of 9, out of those 10, 9 posts are, just advice, general advice. So he might be getting confused on LinkedIn because that's happens a lot. Just like you mentioned, like so much content is coming to LinkedIn. Different people are, writing about same stuff from different perspectives. So how do you make sure that your prospect is reading your post out of, instead of those 9 posts?
Well, the reality is there's competition everywhere. There's competition for content. There's competition in social media. There's competition on LinkedIn. So it goes back to the fundamentals of LinkedIn content is value-added thought leadership, strong opinions, not doing content for the sake of content because you have to post on LinkedIn, but you have to have a purpose and a mission when it comes to serving the target audience. Like you're trying to serve them and you're trying to answer their questions or provide them with food for thought or position yourself as someone who knows what they're talking about and their knowledge reflects what your interests are. So you have to think of LinkedIn content as you have to be very strategic and tactical. So you have to think about what are the topics, what are the editorial pillars, what are the issues, what are the challenges that matter to the people that I want to attract. That's all you can do. That's basically, and then once you execute, it's a matter of pulling some of the different levers, using comments, as, for example, to attract the spotlight. The thing about it is that you want to leverage whatever marketing and brand assets you have. And for many, especially early stage companies, the CEO, the founder, is the most powerful, the most effective sales and marketing asset they have.
Right.
So deploy that on LinkedIn. Establish a vibrant, strong personality. Give me an example of someone who's done that really well is Casey Graham from Gravy. A company that has grown exponentially, that has really scaled because he doubled down on LinkedIn. Like he established himself as one of the leading voices on LinkedIn. Or a guy like Chris Walker, for example. Yeah. With Refined Labs. Like leverage text, leverage video, leverage podcasts to essentially establish himself as a leading voice on LinkedIn. When you see him on LinkedIn, you go, this guy's super smart. I got to talk to him, right? So that's the approach to LinkedIn. And that's why, if you're an entrepreneur CEO, then like you got to jump on the bandwagon and you got to jump hard. That's just my personal belief.
Right.
But it takes some people convincing to get there.
Right. So now coming back to the podcast that you run, and how do you, keep it into your strategy, social media strategy?
That's an interesting question, because one of the things that comes up for a lot of companies is what are the ROI? What's the metrics for a podcast? Is it the number of streams? Is it the number of subscribers? It's like, and for a lot of companies, those are irrelevant. And it sounds kind of strange when you think about it, because, well, if it's not about, like, if I can't quantify the success of my podcast, if it's not about getting more and more downloads or streams, then what's the purpose of a podcast? And I think if you step back, you got to look at a podcast at a very holistic level and recognize that there's a lot of things that matter about podcasts that have nothing to do with metrics. Number one, as a podcast is a great way to establish relationships. So if you invite influencers, customers, prospects onto your podcast, it's a great way of establishing a very personal relationship, one-on-one relationship with someone, where you're essentially tapping into their knowledge. You're saying to them, I think you're a smart or interesting person, and I would love to highlight your expertise and your experience. That's a very flattering thing for a lot of people. And it's a great way to build a relationship.
Yeah.
Like in the 2 years that I've run my podcast, I may have had 1 or 2 people turn down a podcast invitation.
Wow.
It's like catnip. It's irresistible. Like, everybody likes to talk. Everybody's looking to raise their profile. Everyone's looking to tell their story. And a podcast is a great platform to do that. So that's number one, is that you can identify a prospect, for example, and invite them onto your podcast, and you're not trying to sell them.
Yeah.
You're just trying to have a conversation, but all of a sudden they know you. They start to understand your story and what you're doing. And maybe that turns them into a customer. And for your customers, it's a great way of saying to them, I value your business. I'm interested in your insight and your expertise. And I want to showcase what you know to my audience. It's a great way to build loyalty, deeper, stronger relationships. So that's benefit number one. Number two is about extracting as much value from your podcast as possible. So from this podcast that we're doing together, you could write a series of LinkedIn posts, a series of blog posts. You could take video clips of the things that we've talked about. You could do audio clips. You could do a bunch of posts for Twitter and for Facebook. Like you could repurpose and distribute a whole bunch of content from this 30-minute conversation, or however long we're going to talk. You could write an ebook based on our conversation. And if you're a B2B SaaS company and content marketing is a core part of what you're doing, like, this is a content catalyst. Like, podcasts are a great way to generate tons and tons of content for marketing, and content based on someone else's expertise and insight. Yeah. So you're not making it up. You've actually gone to the source and going, hey, you're a really smart person. Can I, basically extract your intelligence and then spread that to the world, right? So that's another thing about podcasting. And I think those two are really powerful. It's just a great way to do marketing in a different way, and not focus on the metrics. In time, if you consistently build out your podcast and deliver high quality content and invite good guests, your audience will grow. Yeah. But even if that doesn't happen, there's lots and lots of benefits to podcasting. And I've gotten, a couple or a few clients onto podcasting. They're very not convinced when they start, but once they gain some momentum, then they get going. And I will say, for anybody who's willing to get into podcasting, there's a couple of things to think. One, the barriers to entry are really low right now, extremely low. Yeah. So you need a microphone, you need to use Zoom or Zencaster to record.
Yeah.
a
Let's yeah.
phone, whatever. You can get some really, like Audacity is free editing software.
Yeah.
You need like a host for your podcast. Like my podcast all in on a monthly basis probably cost me $50 a month. That's it.
Oh.
Like it's super cheap. I mean, there's resources to make it happen, right? But the barriers to entry are really low.
Yeah.
And you can start with one podcast a month and then, use that podcast to do lots of other things.
Correct.
And you don't necessarily have to do a podcast every week. Like if that doesn't work for you, again, it goes back to my walk before you run philosophy. Like commit yourself. Maybe once a month is all you want to do, but do it month after month after month. And then when you get your stride and you get some momentum, then you can do it every 2 weeks. But if you're going to do it. And as I said, the barriers to entry are very low. It's very easy to get started these days.
Wonderful, Mark. So at the end of our show, we have these, a couple of questions. It's a ritual kind of thing where we ask people what they're reading. So as a fractional CMO, what do you read and what would you, suggest to someone who's listening to the show right
now? Well, to be honest with you, I try to read a lot of business books, but I get bored pretty quickly. Like a lot, very few
all of
books.
The same. Yeah.
It's all the same thing. Like in the first 20, 25, 30 pages, you basically get an idea of what they're talking about,
right,
and what the stories are. I spend a lot of time reading on LinkedIn, although that's more challenging these days because there's a lot of competition. The B2B marketing podcast from the people from Sweetfish Media. I'm always reading content. Like there's videos that I watch, that kind of thing. Yeah. In terms of books, I would say if you're looking for like a really inspiring entrepreneurial story, Shoe Dog by Phil Knight from Nike is a great read, a really easy read. I would say the Innovator's Dilemma is a great book.
Right.
I would say anything by Steve Krug, Krug.
Okay.
And he talks about usability and how to make websites more functional is a really good read. So those are some of the books that I'm reading. Right. But if anybody in the audience has some great suggestions on books, I'd love to read a really good business book because they're really hard to find these days.
Well, our guests, they don't just confine to business books. They sometimes, one guest, he sort of, talked about a sci-fi book, Ready Player One, that he likes. So, yeah.
Well, yeah, it's an interesting thing because I think you make a good point. I think a lot of people who spend a lot of time in the digital world, including digital marketers, it's all digital all the time. It's all marketing all the time. And I often think that's the best ideas or the best times to recharge is to read something different. Read something that has nothing to do with the web.
Your domain.
Just read a book, right? Just lose yourself in a book. And it gives your time. I think it really gives your brain time to recharge.
Right.
I think we all spend too much time in front of a microphone or in front of a computer, and our minds are like wired and turned on continually. We won't give ourselves time to breathe and sort of reflect and when you're doing that, then your best ideas come. Like, for example, I play a lot of tennis.
Oh, wonderful. Lawn tennis.
Yep. Sometimes more hard courts here in North America. And when I'm doing that, I'm not thinking about marketing. I'm not thinking about work. I'm just thinking about hitting a ball or chasing a ball. But sometimes you're doing that, and so your mind starts to wander, and you go, "Well, that's a great idea." And I don't know where it came from, but that's a great way to sort of inspire yourself. So that'd be my advice.
Absolutely. So, Mark, would you like to nominate anyone for our show?
So a couple of people. One of them is Jack Fussell, who's also a fractional CMO based in Atlanta. He's mostly focused on B2C. Steve Watt does a lot of work around social selling, so he'd be really good. So those are the two ones that come to mind. Jay Desai is another marketer. He's interesting because I think he's moved to a smaller company, so he's a one-man marketing team right now. Okay. So he might have some really good insight on how do you do marketing as a one-person operation. Right. So those are three marketers I think you should talk to in terms of giving you different perspectives on what's going on in the marketing world. Wonderful.
Mark Evans, thank you so much for your time and for these wonderful nominations, suggestions, 4 C's of LinkedIn, sorry. So We really enjoyed. We really learned a lot. Thank you so much.
Thank you for inviting me. It's always great to talk about B2B marketing.
Yes, and it's always great to have such wonderful people talking about B2B marketing. Thank you so much to our audience as well for sticking with us. I'll see you in the next episode of the Salespanel podcast. Thank you.